Hello, it's Paul and it's
Megan.
Today, our guest is Lisa Lempsink, who's going to be talking about gardens.
Yes, she talks all about garden design. She's a garden designer, and it was an enlightening chat, wasn't it, Paul?
It certainly was. So Lisa covers a lot of things. As I say, she talks about cost, but she talks, interestingly enough, allotments.
Yeah.
And we find out what's trending in terms of gardens,
yes.
Which we won't tell you. You'll have to watch the show to find out if you want to be up to date with your own garden, what you need.
Yes.
And also what there was a boom in during the pandemic. Again, we won't tell you that.
Yes. So yeah, without further ado, we'll let you listen for yourself. Yes, so Lisa, thanks so much for joining us. And so we thought, just to start off, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do and how you got into your field of work.
Okay, well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting
Our
me
pleasure.
along.
Looking forward to this.
Yes, well, of course, gardens are a great topic. I mean, I think since the pandemic in particular, people have been talking about nothing but gardens because a lot of people only discovered their gardens then. It took me actually quite a long time to get into the garden design arena. I'm from Edinburgh. I was born and brought up here. I haven't always lived here. I went off to university and the first time I did a business studies degree. So basically, after I left university, I went into the pharmaceutical industry for about 15 years, and for a long time that was good, and then I think, like many things, it gets past its sell-by date, and I'd always been really interested in plants and gardens and all that kind of thing, and so when I got into my late 30s, I was starting to look around thinking, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing what I'm doing, and basically I just spent a day on the internet looking at all the various courses and things to do with plants of any kind, and thought, wonder what I could do, or wonder what I'd be good enough at doing. And basically I came across this garden design course that was only in its second year up at the Scottish Agricultural College at King's Buildings, and I thought, garden design, okay, that sounds really interesting. Went to the open day and thought, yeah, I love this, and got accepted for a place, handed in my notice at work, and that was really that was the start of everything.
Wow.
So that was 2006, and I was there for 2 years full time. At that stage, they only offered an HND. I did that for 2 years full time, and then literally when the financial crash happened in 2008, I set up my business. So it's really bad timing, but it was fantastic. I have to say, it was the best thing that I've ever done, and launched me on a great and interesting career path. I've met fantastic people since then. Most people who like gardening and into gardens are lovely people. And I've made loads of friends and loads of contacts, and had a very fulfilling life, I think, even more fulfilling, doing something I really enjoy since I changed my career path. So anyway, yes, it was the 2008 crash. Money was pretty tight. Even, the majority of people were holding on to their budgets, and I was just starting out. So I actually got some work in a plant nursery, Mac Plants, out at Pencaitland, improved my plant knowledge and started taking on small jobs. And then as the years go on, you get more confident, you try doing all sorts of different garden designs, and basically I've been going 15 years now, and I really still enjoy it as much as I did, probably more than I did in the beginning, because I'm a lot more confident, I've got a lot more experience now, so that's really how I ended up where I am today in the business. And
when you say more confident, so would you give advice to clients about, and if the client was going to disregard that advice, would you push back these days, or?
I would. If I went to do a consultation, which I do as either initial consultation of someone interested in a design, or I can just do it as a one-off if people want advice about their garden. If people want to then take my advice and disregard it, that's absolutely fine. They're charged for that consultation.
Okay.
It's entirely up to them what they do with that information and advice. I would say that fortunately 98% of people are grateful for your advice, think it helps, and they feel reassured. It might be they just want to run some stuff by you. I mean, I went out to see a lady quite a few years ago now whose mother had just died, and she had been her biggest kind of advisor and support with things to do, many things I think, but the garden was one of them. And suddenly without her mum there to run things past, she felt totally lost. So I just went out and did an initial consultation with her, and that's all she needed.
Yeah.
She just said, I'm thinking about this, what do you think about that? Do you think this is a good idea or a really bad idea? And really, I was just a sounding board. So it can be that, or it can be everything through from that consultation to doing a design, a build, planting plants, supplying the plants. It can be as little or as much as anybody wants. And I think most of my colleagues in garden design are all the same, pretty much.
Yeah.
We offer the same range of services.
Sure.
But mine is a very kind of a la carte, so you can, I price things individually, like designs and planting plans are all fixed prices. So I think people can just take what they want, and some people just want to design and then they want to go off and build the garden themselves, and that's absolutely fine. There is a huge amount of interest in garden design and a huge amount of business out there. And there's lots of us out there now.
It's all these TV programs, isn't
it? It is, I know. Well, yes, I was going to say the TV programs can sometimes mislead people in terms of the cost.
And the speed.
Of which they can get it done. Because sometimes, very rarely do things, take a few months. Yeah. Often they take up to a year for the different stages, and sometimes it takes more than that, depending on a lot of things. And the pandemic was an exceptional time where people were all stuck at home, and they suddenly realized that their neighbors could see into their houses, something that when they were out to work every day they had never noticed. And the number one thing that people asked me to come and discuss with them was their privacy.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So like big bamboo screens and all sorts of things going up.
What do you think would be really big and could grow really fast? And I think, it was great. But I realised I was having almost the same conversation, just with different garden areas and types and aspects and things, so slightly different problems, but privacy was the big thing. Yeah, it still is, but that was a really big thing. Yeah.
and actually gardens of today, if we go back to the client you mentioned there, maybe gardens 30, 40, 50 years ago are very different, aren't they? Is there such a thing as trends in garden? I remember my granddad used to love his roses, and he had lots of rose beds, and it was fantastic growing up with my granddad, looking after them on an immaculate lawn. And you don't see so much of that these days.
You don't. I have to say, the one thing, I think there are trends, absolutely. I think the one thing about lawns that's really interesting, you say that tends to still be the male preserve. A lot of men are still very proud of their lawns, and that's their thing. They don't really mind what their partner does with the rest of the garden, as long as their lawn is a decent size and is protected. Striped, exactly. But yes, I would say certainly for the last few years, maybe a bit further back, sustainability is obviously the number one topic, along with climate change, and these are actually quite big things that we are looking at in garden design. Sustainability being number one, but also our climate is changing. We're all feeling it, even here in Edinburgh, and so there's lots of weather-related issues. We can get much warmer, drier spells. We've had quite a lot of drought in Edinburgh, and then people, there's all sorts of pests and diseases associated with that, and then you get periods where it's pouring with rain all the time, so the soil's going from being very dry boggy, to being flooded. So, I would say climate change, sustainability, and in terms of style, a lot of people looking for relaxed gardens, but cottage-style gardens. So the kind of traditional Old English Scottish garden is still very much favoured, but people want a low-maintenance version of that. So low maintenance is the top of almost everybody's list.
Right, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cottages are most viewed property on the ESPC last month and the month before was a cottage. Interesting enough. So it's the dream, isn't it?
It is the dream. And the pandemic, I think, was another thing that made people look at moving out to the countryside. And even people in Edinburgh, I think, and that's, I work anywhere anybody would want me to work, but there's so much business in Edinburgh, so many gardens, and people are all looking to maximise. So previously, when people's kids had grown up and left home, they would think, right, well, should we downsize now? I'm not seeing that now. I'm seeing people wanting to retire and stay in the house, but have a garden that's more suited to their particular needs. So there's quite a lot of future proofing. I've had quite a lot of people, even though they're perfectly able-bodied now, asking me to design the garden to make sure that wheelchairs can get around easily. And I went through a run of that for the last couple of years, people thinking, well, maybe me or my partner or somebody will end up in a wheelchair and we need wheelchair access. So that's interestingly been a kind of recurring theme. But people still want to just entertain, do a little bit of pottering in the garden, sit out and have their gin and tonics, entertain their friends. And certainly people that come to me, and I can't speak for my colleagues, but very much are looking for what I would describe as planty gardens. So lots of plants, lots of enough hard landscaping, patios and things, obviously to make it accessible and usable and appropriate, but they love plants, flowers, all that kind of thing, and they want lots of them.
And so, chatting about your clients there, do you have a kind of typical client? Is there like an age range of a client that normally comes to you, or is there a lot of diversity there?
Not really. There is very sort of I would say age-wise over 50s. I have had a few clients in the last couple of years in their 40s. I've finished a family garden at Murrayfield recently. But the predominant age range is 50 plus. And I would say
sure you
maybe
don't ask
60
these
to
people,
70. No, you don't. But they usually tell you the retiring
You're a pretty good
thing.
guess,
Yeah.
Okay.
So I say 50 plus, then that kind of. But it very much is that age group. And again, they're not downsizing, they're staying. And they often, apart from having good pensions, are often inheriting money from parents who've passed away, and they just think, if we're going to spend the next 20 years here, let's make this really nice, let's make this work for us. So I would say yes, and I think the younger age groups, when I first started out, I used to get people in new builds a lot who were young, so they'd be in their 20s or early 30s, and to be honest, they couldn't really afford the garden to be designed and built in the way that they want to. And I'm afraid, like everything, this all comes down to money. And if you think that now currently contractors, a 3-man team of contractors costs £4,500 a week, and that's just for labour. If your garden build is 3 weeks, which is fairly standard, you're already looking at, £13,000-14,000, and that's just for labour. So you can see that if you add materials onto that, and then the design, the plants and everything, your average garden is often £30,000 to £40,000, which is not an inconsiderable amount of money. And I think these youngsters, they don't have it. They're already paying big mortgages if they can get on the property ladder. And it's a shame, because it would be lovely, especially if they're settling down, having a family and they're wanting that. But I'm afraid it seems to be the preserve at the moment of the older generations being able to afford that. So,
and people who are, as you said, who are ultimately probably going to stay in the property for a long time to get a return on that, because you're sinking quite a bit of money in there, aren't you?
Totally.
Investing, shall we say?
Investing. Well, it's interesting you should mention that. That was something I was going to bring up, because often I say to people, especially if you get, for example, a couple who she loves the garden, she really wants it doing, the husband or partner's not quite so sure he wants to spend that amount of money. And it's horses for courses, but I say to people, it's really a good investment, because if you look at the size of your garden, and let's say your garden's going to cost you £70,000 to £80,000, if you have an extension put on your house, it's going to cost you more than that. And yet it's strange the way different people value or don't value the garden space. Yet if you have a nice, well-designed garden that's safe, and you sell your property at any stage, whether it's now or 20 years' time, you're going to get, if you look after it, you're going to get a great return on your investment. And you're going to sell your property really quickly. When I first started out, I designed a garden for a lovely couple in Pencaitland, and they lived in a new build estate, and She was a farmer's daughter and she didn't like living in a new build estate. They'd been there for 10 years. The back garden, there was nothing apart from a little bit of patchy grass. She said, right, I'd really like you to design the garden. I really hate it. Everything I do with the garden goes wrong. So I did do that. The garden turned out very nicely. And then I think it'd probably be about 6 to 12 months later, she got in touch. She said to me, you're going to really hate me, but we've just sold our house and we're moving. And I said, no, it's fine. It's up to you what you do. And she said to me, the house went so quickly because the garden was what differentiated itself from everybody else's on that particular estate.
Yeah.
It was a small estate.
And I think that I've got a couple of friends have purchased new build houses, and quite often, especially the back garden, it comes...
With nothing.
Yeah, completely empty, and it is completely up to you how much, or how most people just throw some turf down, but have taken that time and really working hard on the garden, I think is something that really makes you stand out, especially when you see more modern properties come on the market and you know, all the houses in the street are the same, but the garden is what makes it stand out. I think that's really nice.
Absolutely.
And even astroturf.
Oh yes, I do have. I know a lot of people.
How do you feel about that? Yeah. You were
it's
purist. I mean, well, yeah.
No, I would say that obviously natural fresh turf is better, but I think astroturf is really good.
There's a place for it.
Yeah, I think there's a place for it, and I know that it's not sustainable, and there'll be lots of people looking and listening and thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe she's recommending it. But there are a few places where I think it's really useful. I think for perhaps ladies who live on their own and don't want to lug a big lawnmower about for maybe a very small patch of grass, very useful. Had a very nice couple who weren't into their garden at all, but were going to have a family, and they wanted some astroturf because they just wanted it to look nice all the time. If there's a lot of areas where it's very dry or very damp all the time, your lawn is going to look terrible most of the time. And sometimes in these areas, it's good. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for your whole garden, but I think there's a place. It might be a small place, but I think there's a place for it. Yeah. And you can get some really nice natural-looking turf now. It's incredibly...
My mum and dad's got it. I keep going out to look at it. I can't believe it's not real. I'm touching it thinking this is going to be real. It's unbelievable.
I know. It is unbelievable. In fact, I did a garden in Blackhall probably about 8 years ago now, and they had a big back garden, a big front garden, and they had artificial lawn put down in the front garden and fresh turf put down in the back, because the gentleman worked away, and when he came back at the weekends, mowing the lawn in one garden was quite enough for him. And his wife said, interestingly, they had big hedges, and she said she was gardening underneath the hedge, so to speak, in the front garden where the artificial lawn was down, and she heard two ladies passing by, peering in and saying to each other, oh, isn't that beautiful? Look at their lawn. It's absolutely immaculate. And she was laughing because she thought, well, they obviously thought it was real, and it wasn't. So, there are situations. And often if you were, say you were somebody who had a disability and wanted something like that, some nice, fresh-looking lawn, but couldn't get out to mow it or that kind of thing, perfect for them. Yeah. So there are situations where it's good.
Yeah.
So Lisa, when you arrive at a client's home to look at their garden, to start that kind of initial consultation and design of the garden, what is the first thing that you look for?
They normally take you into the house, and that's very useful because you get an idea, a sense of their style, colours, all that kind of thing, and then you have a look at the garden space. And then basically I ask them to tell me what they're looking for, and I say to them, don't worry, you don't have to work out where everything goes or describe it in detail. Just tell me, how do you want to use the garden? And I think getting a really tight brief right at the start of what people want and what people don't want, because actually what you don't want is as important to me as what you do want. And I did have a couple did a very nice garden. Well, they were a lovely couple. Did a very nice front garden for them actually about 4 or 5 years ago. And the client said, she said to me, do you know, I don't know what I want. I just hate the space. There's just nothing there. And I said to her, well, tell me, what don't you like? Oh, I hate the horrible way that the lawn goes into some sort of strange peak at the top. So the first thing I did actually was create a perfect circle, and then the driveway was rebuilt around that, and then I kind of started from there. But actually, if people don't have much of a brief, it actually can be quite tricky actually, because you've got to then try and read their minds to think, well, how do you live your life? What would be good for you? So I do that. Budget is important. I do usually say to people, do you have a budget in mind? They usually say, we've never done this before, we don't really know, how much this is going to cost. And so I do tell them about the labour costs, and I try to say to them that, when I started out, you could get a small but nice garden for £5,000, and then it was 10, and then it was 20, and now it's 30 plus. And if you don't have good access to your garden, so the new builds are perfect because you can usually take off the gates and they can get mini diggers and all this kind of stuff in. But terraced houses in Edinburgh, Victorian terraced houses are a nightmare from that point of view, because everything has to come through the house. Yeah. And it puts the price up hugely, because the guys usually have to hand dig everything, and you really don't want that.
Wow,
it's
because
just
you're taking
really
it
expensive.
all the way back through once you've...
Literally the time it takes. So, what would normally be a £30,000 garden suddenly becomes a £50,000 garden. And so, yes, it's all these kind of things that, you see and you learn about. So there's no point of people, if you go to see someone, they say, oh, well, you look at their garden, they say, well, I've got a budget of about £3,500. Do you think that'll do it? And I say to them, well, it's not that £3,500 is nothing. It's just, in this particular world we're living in at the moment, everything is expensive. These are the labour costs. That's before you've even got materials. Then you've got my design fees. So in that kind of case, I would give them a name of a good contractor and say to them, get in touch with them. They'll do you a nice little change your patio slabs or whatever it is and tart things up a bit. But it can cost a lot of money to clear all the stuff initially from the garden and have it disposed of. So the contractors who are doing that they have to pay for that. Yeah. So it gets loaded on. Yeah. So there's nothing cheap about having your garden.
No, but what you're talking there about, Lisa, is a wholesale change, aren't you? Maybe raising or reducing the ground level and a big piece of work.
Absolutely, it's a big piece of work. I mean, I think that's exactly it. And
what about? I mean, there are a lot of smaller gardens.
Yeah.
In and around Edinburgh. What's your advice with how do you make the most of the space there?
I think the way to do it, I think there's a couple of things I would say about this. I think if you've got some ideas yourself, that's great. You have to really look at the aspect, how dark or light the area is. You don't want to overcrowd a small area and clutter it up. So I think it's being realistic about what you can really get into that space.
Instead of packing everything in there.
Instead of packing everything in. Also, I would say if people are doing it themselves, I would get a table and chairs and literally put them in that garden space and see how much space they take up. Because it's things, for example, I'm working on a lovely garden in Duddingston at the moment, and the couple already have, it's a beautiful new build, but they already have a 2-metre deep, if you like, patio area, but they want a table and chairs for 6 people. Now it isn't deep enough for that. You need 3 meters, because if you think it's about 900 millimeters for a table, so that's the width of a table, then you really need a meter at each side for people, one, to be able to sit, and then people to push their chair back and get out. And then if you don't leave enough space, they're going to fall off the back of the patio. So, it's these kind of things, practical things. But I would honestly say there's a lot of designers about. I think if you've got some ideas and you want to sketch them out, just pay for a consultation. You don't even have to pay for anything more, and get some good advice. And I would also recommend that you ask them who they would recommend as contractors, because there's lots of fly-by-nights and people who make a real mess of your garden and take all the money. I've seen that. I've been to see patch-up jobs. That's not something people want to touch. And it's sad to think people have spent a considerable amount of money and been ripped off. So I always say to people, if you don't know who to go to, get in touch with me, Doesn't matter if you don't use my services. I'm more than happy to give you the names of reliable and trustworthy contractors, electrical engineers, all that kind of thing. So I think it's quite tricky, but I think once people have had that initial discussion, they're often a lot more confident about going off and kind of designing it themselves.
So, Lisa, one of the other things, we were just having a chat beforehand. I'm going to reel these off, and you can give us your thoughts on it. Flat roof gardens, which I think is quite a novel idea. You know, as you say, we talk about small spaces, but living walls, which you only see in posh bars and restaurants, but is it a thing? Could we have one?
Yeah.
And allotments.
Yes.
We'll come to allotments last.
Right, we'll do that.
I can
That
see
sounds
your
good.
face ready for that one.
I'll work myself up to that one.
But yeah, let's talk about flat roofs and living walls now.
Yeah, really popular now. You often see them not necessarily on people's houses, certainly not in the cities very much. You tend to see them on like architects often have lovely buildings, and they've put a lovely living roof on top of their building. They are very popular. I mean, you can have it on your roof if you have the right sort of house. You can also have it on top of, I mean, this is quite a novel and neat idea for anybody, on top of, if you want your wheelie bins, which are plentiful and rather unattractive looking, put into a really nice kind of storage unit, you can actually have like a sedum flat roof on top of that. Wow. So it completely hides this functional, essential thing we need, but also you can tidy it away and cover over and make it look beautiful and natural and part of the garden. And when people, don't have very big gardens, personally, I think, having an average sized garden is great. I don't think you want one that's really, really big, because most people don't have the time or energy to do it. You often have to have things like bins quite close to seating areas if there's not a lot of room, and just depends on the way things work. So that's what I would recommend, using that kind of thing. Sheds, most people have a shed in their garden. You can have it put on that. And then when you come to living walls, I've just actually come back from Germany. I went with some garden design pals to see Buga, which is the federal garden show. So every 2 years in Germany they have a beautiful, big, really full-on garden show, and they illustrate every type of planting. They actually took over an old disused American army base. It's Mannheim this year, and in fact they created, there were living walls and examples of all the things we were talking about there, basically trying to say to the public, listen, there's things you can do, even if you just have a flat, an apartment with a small balcony. You can easily rig up these kind of things. So you just need to kind of Google that on the internet, and it doesn't matter how small your space is, you can have something living. And I thought it was very interesting what we saw there in terms of promoting that. Not really Chelsea Flower Show like, more anonymous. It wasn't saying, this designer's done this bed. The planting was absolutely stunning. And then they leave all this for the public in that town, and they move on a couple of years later to somewhere else. Yeah,
again, it's like community-based things, isn't it? And again, we were talking earlier about the prevalence you see at roundabouts and just bits of laybys and stuff where there's been wildflowers just sown or seed sown or maybe blown, don't know. But
I think a combination.
There. And it's great.
It is great. And
Is it great? Yes.
I think it is. I think it is. I'm sure the council are always very relieved when somebody else, not asking them for any budget, but goes ahead and does it themselves, which I think probably brings you on to the allotment topic that we were chatting about earlier. And I think, when you see people doing exactly what we've discussed, taking a little bit of space or a little bit of land disused somewhere near them that's ugly, and then they can just sow some seeds really cheaply and they get a lovely result. They think it doesn't have to be perfect, it just improves things. And I think it's a frustration of a lot of people who often don't have gardens, live in flats. They don't have that outdoor space and that ability to be creative like that. And I think that's where allotments now, where people are sowing often lots of flowers as well as traditional vegetables, where I think there's a need to perhaps revisit the system by which people are allotted allotments, because a lot of allotments, not all but a lot, are very big. The people that are given the allotments don't have the time or the wherewithal to manage them, and these things would be better divided up. Instead of having long waiting lists, people waiting 10, 12, 15 years for a space, they should be possibly, divided into smaller, more manageable units and given to people who live in flats as a priority, who don't have a garden, rather than people who currently have a front and back garden, plus they have an allotment. So there seems to be an awful lot of that, and not enough to encourage people in apartments and flats to garden and to have that freedom and fresh air.
It's good. I remember Monty Don talking about it at length, about touching the earth, being soil, good for your mental health, getting outdoors, watching things grow, so
definitely. Yeah. I think that's a really big thing. Mental health's been on the agenda for quite a long time now, and a lot of the things like the show gardens at Chelsea and the other places, Tatton Park and places like that, are often sponsored by mental health charities. So, and I think the benefits are absolutely astounding from that point of view, and you always feel better being outside in the fresh air. Even if you're just pottering about, you don't really know what you're doing. Even if all your vegetables die and your flowers don't come up the right way.
You see me in my mum's garden, yeah.
At least you're out there trying. And eventually, like, we all have successes,
something
we
will
all
live.
have failures. Exactly. But it is really great. And I think that would... There's lots of things that I think need to change in society, and I think the use and the allocation of green space is definitely one of them, and I think that should be done as a priority, personally.
Good point. Well made.
So, Lisa, just before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you just one more question about what your kind of favourite design or pieces to design are in a garden. Is there certain aspects of the garden that you really favour over others, or
I would say that I absolutely love taking a space that somebody has had possibly for quite a long time and has never known what to do with, or maybe hasn't had the money or the inclination for whatever reason to do anything, and taking that space and completely transforming it. And that's really what you can do. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But I love doing kind of organic flowing shapes and really transforming what are often long rectangular gardens, or quite sort of straight lines and quite uninspiring shapes, and turning them into something soft and beautiful, really. So I would say, is there an area that I prefer to work in? Probably not really. I think that the area I love possibly the most is the planting plan side of things, because you can really soften it up and make it look great. I love doing pergolas and arbours and all that kind of stuff. And water features, what I would say, if you want a water feature in your garden, is get somebody in to do it if you really are not sure how to do it yourself. People either really love water features or they don't. I'd put them kind of close to the sitting area. You might want a nice sandstone globe with water trickling out the top, just something nice and soft. But I think that it's the overall taking of an unloved, unused space and making it into something lovely that everybody, the whole family or friends, can really, enjoy. So, I think it's just the kind of overall softening and recreating that I love.
Good. Perfect. Seems like a nice place to leave it.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Lisa, for coming onto the show.
You're welcome.
At the end, just wanted to ask if you've got any social media or any way that anyone listening can get in touch or follow you online.
Yes, so I'm on Instagram. That is Lempsink Garden Design. So you can follow me on that. Other than that, please have a look at my website, which is lempsink.co.uk. And I'd be delighted to hear from anybody if you've got any questions, or you just even want a one-off consultation. Happy to do that and set you on the right path to creating something lovely in your own space.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that was Lisa. So there you go. Hopefully you learnt a lot there. And for those that now realise your neighbours are looking in, Bamboo is the answer, we think.
Yeah, or very tall, fast-growing trees.
Indeed. But we hope you enjoyed that. Thanks again to Lisa for coming along. I think she was really gave us a lot there and gave us lots of good insight. And join us again for our next episode.
Yep, next week. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or suggestions or comments or reviews, please feel free to email us at marketing@espc.com, or you can leave us a rating and review wherever you are listening.
But thanks for listening. It means a lot to us, it really does. So thanks again, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.